Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema, and today we're going to be ranking all 8 Matthew Vaughn movies from my least favorite to my favorite with the release of Argylle that came out in theaters just recently. So let me know down in the comments below how you would rate Matthew Vaughn movies or of what you've seen thus far. But make sure to like this video, subscribe, help me reach my goal of 500 subscribers here on this channel as we all share the commonality of loving film altogether. And coming in last place, we have Layer Cake. Now, while this has an intriguing premise, that's a spy thriller about this man that has a hidden name, about him trying to get off the job early, being a hitman, trying to retire and be on his own. He gets sucked into 2 more assignments for the career, and just what he has to do all along the way is particularly uninteresting despite the intriguing premise, and the action and some of the camera movements are good enough for what they are. There is a fair story hidden within, and yet from the very beginning, the first 10 minutes are just an opening monologue that feel kind of pointless, that feel like they're just trying to explain everything about the world instead of showing us what we're trying to get. And moving on, even from that, it just never goes along the way to catch on to my attention, offer something that really intrigued me. And maybe it's the subject matter, just about selling drugs or going about doing these different hitman duties, but just even with some of the thrilling moments that are sprinkled in here without, and it just never really manages to capture my attention, even with the cast, with Daniel Craig being the main lead, and also the story just sounding like it could be something of substantial means. But unfortunately, even with the camera movements, that some of them are trying to be too creative for their own use, unfortunately, the emotions never quite click for me at the end of the day. But coming in number 7, we have Kingsman: The Golden Circle. Now, while the first one I do enjoy for what it is that I'll get to later on, this one particularly tries to be a bit too much, tries to step its grounds and go over the top on some of the tropes that went on with the first movie, taking the action to a whole nother level that ends up being too much for its own means, ends up having characters that are less compelling, tropes and characters that just don't really fit in all in the same ways. And so just the way they go about the flow of the story does not quite work quite as well, and a comedy just doesn't always blend in the right ways. And so unfortunately, you're left with a mess that, while it does have its moments of great filmmaking, great action, it ultimately fails for what it's after. Ultimately. And coming in number 6, we have Stardust. Now, this is an interesting one, being the second film in this filmography, being this fantasy feature and having a little bit of sci-fi and action elements along the way, and just the way they go about these different tropes with fantasy and having these inclusions of interesting ideas and premises. While some of it's fairly familiar for story elements, it still stands out on its own, but unfortunately it fails to be anything more to offer to the genre on its own. And while there's certain characters that really stand out, some of the themes don't ultimately land out in the best way that I particularly enjoy for what it's going after. It feels fairly well and decent. I still gave it a 3 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd, but it ultimately doesn't offer everything that I feel like it ought to. And when you're going to the end of the story, there's one of the witches that makes a choice that ultimately, it really lends itself over to making a bad decision when it really didn't need to add in that extra moment that makes it feel clever. But when you think about the logic of the situation, it's a really dumb decision for what they're going for. But coming at number 5, we have the latest Argylle. Now, I do enjoy just a good spy thriller, having this author being so close in what she's writing on the page to a secret government organization that's happening behind the scenes, and just all how she's sucked into it, having this hitman, and just what they do with that, having Sam Rockwell be the double, the real life reality of what a bodyguard sort of is versus the Henry Cavill, how they do that. And then there's some really clever camera shots where they switch back and forth between the two, where she's seen Henry Cavill as being the character in her book, instead of Sam Rockwell just being the one that's based on reality of the situation. And so there's a good amount of humor, a great amount of action. It feels like it is a bit too much at sometimes, but it does go along with the premise in quite a creative way. And being a writer myself, I do enjoy the meta-narrative, just being self-aware of how well it's going into playing along with what the knowledge is. And some of the plot twists, they're a little more subtle because unfortunately there's so many plot twists. It sometimes overdoes itself, softens the blow of the next one once you see what's going on. And so it still performs really well in my taste, but doesn't end up exceeding my expectations of what I was hoping for it. But coming in number 4, we have The Kingsman. Now this is a prequel that came after the two that he first put out. It's just going over the Civil War and having the origins to the Kingman. And it does have its good bit of fun, its good bit of action with great camera movements that are really offer great shots for him starting to perfect some of his filmmaking for what they're going for, the flow of the camera, and the characters as well. They're not super compelling, not quite as creative as what you're really hoping to get out of it, but I do enjoy a good war film every once in a while, and so mixing that in the spy genre is not the perfect mix for what this story has to offer, but it does end up winning my heart for what the general use of at least offering a good story has to deliver on. But coming in number 3, we have X-Men First Class. No only X-Men film he has delivered, and it really does deliver well for the effective ideas of just having these younger X-Men before we get into what we commonly know them to be, and just seeing things we didn't see before with just the general ideas of training the X-Men in full sequences, and also having the friendship of Charles Xavier and Magneto, and the origins of those characters as a villain and a good guy. What they have to do with that, it is really clever, it is witty, it goes over some ideas we went in the past just for creating the X-Men to begin with as superheroes, as going into boarding school and how that's all started out. But it's really clever, really witty, and the action really delivers on creating a great superhero film that supersedes what the director is ultimately offering on his own things. And coming at number 2, we have KK. Now this is one I just really enjoy watching it for the first time recently, just being really self-aware, really grounded down on earth, being a superhero film that goes over the logic of real life scenarios, getting hurt from jumping from a tall place, not really having super powers, but just having to try and stand up for people that no one stands up for. And how they go about this sequence is bloody, is gory, and yet it succeeds in really diving in on its premise, being ridiculous in some ways because it's really far out there, and yet still maintaining the grounds to reality that makes it feel like it has its own cleverness that is ultimately delivered on based on the characters that you really care for, the depth that you can really dive into, and adding in a little bit of romance, a lot of action, and a great espionage thriller. But that leaves at number 1, Kingsman: The Secret Service. Now this one, I haven't watched in a couple of years, but still stands strong on its own 2 feet. It really it sinks into the momentum of being an action thriller, being a spy organization that really captures the world building that this film has to offer, that I still cannot forget. So many of the great scenes, so many great sequences, the way they go about the building of the character, the establishment of how this franchise flows, that unfortunately doesn't land its way into the sequels, but it still stands on its own ground. And what they have to do with all the characters, the establishing the comedy that blended in super well, it was such a thrill ride for the first time watching this, and I really do still enjoy it to this day. What they have with the cast and everything involved makes it my #1 film from Matthew Vaughn. So that's just my ranking of all 8 Matthew Vaughn movies from my least favorite to my favorite with the release of Argylle. So let me know down in the comments below how you would rank his films, or even where Argylle stands within the mix. So that's just all. Make sure to like this video, comment down below what your ranking of his films are, and subscribe if you haven't already. Help me reach my goal of 500 subscribers here on this channel. So that's just all. Make sure to go do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.